Thank you, Eric. Good morning, everyone. So let me begin by, before I describe what secure choice is, let me describe what it is not. So first and foremost, this plan is, the concept is a basic plan for those who currently do not have access to any employer-sponsored retirement plan. And so, it's not to undermine the current system. It's not to be, used as a model to replace current DB system in the public space, in the Taft-Hartley space, or in the single-employer corporate space. Nor is it meant to undermine 401ks or other defined contribution systems. And in fact, we feel that in the private sector, what you need to have is, we need to rebuild the three legs of the retirement stool. And in the private sector, it begins with Social Security. It has to include personal savings. And in personal savings, we view defined contribution plans as part of personal savings. But what is missing for a vast majority of folks in the private sector is a pension plan, and that's what Secure Choice aims to fill. So the concept here is that it is a public-private partnership based at the state level to bring retirement security to those who currently do not have access to any employer-sponsored plan. And we know that there is a strong correlation between the size of the employer and whether that employer provides any sort of a retirement plan. So namely, smaller the employer, the less likely that that employer provides any sort of a plan. So ultimately, the concept here is really to address the lack of retirement security for those who work for a small employer. And there is the possibility of leveraging the economies of scale built into statewide plans, but it's not necessary. So the question is, why would a state look into this concept? And we think that there are plenty of reasons why states want to do this. I mean, ultimately, it's about having productive taxpayers in retirement instead of those who drain the social safety net. It helps the state manage the workforce. And quite candidly, we really do not see any foreseeable federal legislative action. And we do think that states in this area can live up to its reputation of being laboratories of good government, and that this is an area that states should really venture into. And later in the presentation, I'll give you examples of where 7 states actually are. So what are we trying to do here? And so, we talked about the 3 legs of the retirement stool. Again, it begins with Social Security. And for an average worker, what they can anticipate is a replacement of income of roughly about 30% if you enter the workforce at age 25. We also assume that, again, you need to have personal savings, and we feel that that can make up another 25% of replacement. So with Social Security and personal savings, you're at 55% of income replacement in your retirement years. Most experts believe that you need somewhere between 80 to 90. So the delta is what we're trying to make up. And with something like Secure Choice, we feel that you can get into that sweet spot between 80 and 90%. So in terms of structure, what are we talking about? Again, it's a state-based public-private partnership where the state creates legislation to effectively create this new structure and trust. It would be a single multi-employer plan. It would have a independent board of trustees that would have all 3 stakeholders represented on the board. So it would have representation from the state, that is the plan sponsor. It would have representation from employers that are participating in this plan. And ideally, it would also have representation of the participants, the employees, to make sure that all stakeholders are represented. It is a defined benefit. We've called it a career accumulation plan, which effectively is a variation of a cash balance plan. And because of the target audience, right, the target participants, which are small employers or those who work for small employers, and we know that the small business is very volatile. They could be in business one day and out of business the next. We felt that we had to make very conservative actuarial, funding, and investment assumptions. And we'll get into details of that a little bit later. Normal retirement under our assumptions is age 65. Nothing magical about that. We could raise it to 67 to be aligned with Social Security, but currently we have it set at 65. And the contribution rate for the plan is 6%. Now, the plan itself is agnostic about where that 6% comes from. But from our perspective, having come from the public plan community, where it is a contributory plan, meaning that employees pay for part of the costs of funding the plan, we feel that 6%, some portion of that 6% could be borne by employees. And again, it's up to the individual states to legislate how they want to break up that 6%. In terms of discount rate for investment purposes, we use 7%. We use 5% for the crediting for the benefit. And because it is a defined benefit plan, we do guarantee something, and it is principal plus 3% nominal. It is immediate vesting. Because it is a variation of a cash balance plan, there are individual account balances, but for investment purposes, all the assets are commingled. Ideally, we think that if the state, particularly if a state has a statewide investment board, that this could be part of the asset that the statewide investment board could manage, again, leveraging the size and the economies of scale that the statewide plan already has. The death benefit is the annuitized amount of the account balance. And again, I want to stress that this is to augment, not replace any existing retirement programs. So we feel that one of the keys of secure choice is the 3, 5, 7%. And again, because we want to make sure that this plan, which is targeted at small business with the volatility that small businesses have, that it really is built like a Sherman tank. And so we've taken what we consider to be a belt and suspenders approach, meaning there's a lot of redundancies, a lot of methods to make sure that this plan is sustainable. So one of it is we take a lower discount rate of 7%, which again we feel is very achievable. But beyond that, the crediting rate is roughly at 5%. So that spread between the long-term expected return and the crediting rate helps make the plan sustainable. In terms of some of the assumptions that we've made as we've stress tested and modeled the plan, we assume that for employees in their younger years, a 5% increase in salary, for the first bandwidth of between 18 to 39, and then as an employee matures throughout their career, their income increases starts to tail off, and so for the employee in their 40s, it's at 3.5% per year, and then employees at age 50 and older, we reduce it down to 3%. So in terms of sort of this Sherman tank, to make sure that this is sustainable, what have we done? So again, it's partially by the plan design, right? We again said it's normal retirement at age 65 with no subsidized early retirement. It's basic crediting rates, no prior service awards, so you don't start off with the plan in a whole. Again, conservative assumptions, and if for whatever reason there are, reductions or experiences some negative experience to the plan, there are ways of addressing that. So one of the ways of addressing or making this a Sherman tank is how we calculate the funding contribution. So we do two calculations of the annual contribution. One is what we call the standard funding contribution, which is the normal cost plus 15-year level dollar close amortization. We take that figure, we do that analysis, we put it over to the side. Then we do a second one, which we call the conservative funding calculation, which is normal cost plus 20-year level dollar amortization. And then we make that calculation, and whichever of the two is higher, we take 70% of that value and then add 35% of the lesser value. So you can already see that we built in, again, more conservative funding into the calculation of the annual contribution by doing it two ways and weighing the higher of the costs at 70% and 35% of the lower. Plus, as you can see, it's at 105% of the combined. So again, another way of making this a sustainable plan. Then we do have what we call a dividend reserve fund. And so when the plan experiences positive returns and it's overfunded, 70% of assets in excess of 110% can go into the dividend reserve fund. And when when there is a dividend reserve fund, it is up to the discretion of the trustees to use the dividend reserve fund for either shoring up the plan more, or maybe potentially even giving it out as a benefit to the participants. So we've tried to wring out as much risk out of the plan as possible, but again, because it is a DB plan, there are going to be some risks, and we don't really say definitively how a state should address any termination liability. We give them a plethora of options. Some of it could be that the state itself backstops it. We don't think that's a real viable alternative in this political environment, but it could be one way. This is an ERISA plan, so it could be backstopped by PBGC, or the state could create its own sort of insurance pool, or there could be a private sector solution where essentially you have a wraparound plan. Or at worst, everybody gets a haircut. So in terms of our sample projection, okay, thank you. We assumed these assumptions that it's a typical small employer with 25 employees, ages uniformly distributed over the working career, an average salary of $40,000. And so what we said in the first set of stress testing is, do we think the plan will work as we think it will? So we said, the row second from the bottom, we said, all right, let's just test it to see if it does. So we assume 7% for 10 years. And does the plan actually do what we think it will do? And so the first top line, I think, is one of the most important lines, which is the contribution steady? And it is. That is pretty much, just along 6% of pay. Does the plan get overfunded, which it's designed to do? And yes, if it meets all the investment return assumptions, the plan automatically gets overfunded. Is there a dividend reserve fund created in this scenario? No, because we're not at above 110%. So, you know, the first stress testing, it works to the degree that we thought it would. So then we said, all right, how does it work in boom economic times? So we modeled it to an actual plan from 1990 through the modeling was investment returns of a plan, of a public plan through the 1990s through 2000. And you can see, again, second line from the bottom, the actual returns of this, this plan. And the top line, again, is what's important. And it's, again, it's holding fairly steady at 6%. And you can start seeing in year 7 and going forward that it does start to build a dividend reserve fund. So it works during good economic times. Now, how about during bad economic times? Is this plan sustainable? So we modeled 2000 through 2010. Obviously, you have the dot-com bust as well as the financial crisis. And what happens? Again, the actual investment returns of a plan at this row second from the bottom. The top row, you can see the contribution rates, again, holding fairly steady. You see at year 10, which is essentially 2009, that the contribution rate went up to 6.74. But we acknowledge that, but it's not a doubling of the contribution as some plans saw. And even through this rough economic patch, the plan is building reserves, again, because of the spread between the 7 and 5%, as well as the conservative funding formula that we use. So in terms of how we think we measure up to ages, Eric, hopefully we can grade on the curve here. But we think that each stakeholder's role is aligned. So in terms of employer, again, our target audience is small employers. They don't have an HR department. So what we envision for Secure Choice is all the fiduciary responsibility that a typical employer would bear under ERISA would be borne by the plan at the statewide level. So the filing of the regulations, making sure that it meets all the ERISA compliance, that would be done by the plan. Because it's a DB plan, again, it helps with individual choices by employees. So we think that in terms of alignment, we do fairly well. In terms of governance, again, because small employers don't have the time, we place a lot of the responsibility on the board of trustees. We think because all the stakeholders are represented on the board of trustees, it would reduce real and potential conflicts of interest. We think it would recognize the manager's competing needs, and the staff board and financial experts are there to help with the investment and administration of the plan. Again, we think it's efficient. It's a statewide multiple employer plan, so we think it meets the efficiency test. And again, hopefully we can score A+ in this one. I mean, I think with all the things that we've done, we think we made a Sherman tank of a plan. So in terms of what states are doing, so currently there are 7 states that have enacted legislation. The furthest along is Massachusetts. And let me be clear, the 7 states, it's a generic concept of a public-private partnership. It's not necessarily our Secure Choice pension design. But in Massachusetts, the state treasurer would open up the state's 457 plan to small nonprofit employers in the state. They have a plan document that has already been approved by Treasury. They have a master trust that is currently going through the approval process in Massachusetts, going through the approval process at Treasury. As soon as they get that, they will open their doors and start enrolling participants. California, there's a California Secure Choice Retirement Savings Trust. There's a board of trustees that have been composed, and currently they are doing a feasibility study. Oregon enacted a commission to look at this, and they published their recommendations about 2 months ago. And then this year, state of Connecticut, Minnesota, and Vermont passed legislation to essentially do a feasibility study, and the state of Maryland has, through executive order, created a task force to study a statewide public-private partnership. So, again, we think there is interest by states. We think next year, 2015, is going to be even a bigger year where more activity is going to be happening at the state level. But, what's more important is, because we're trying to target small businesses, are they interested? And we did a poll of 500 small business owners nationally, as well as 500 small business owners in California, and the results were just, outstanding, that 82% of small business owners found the concept of secure choice pensions to be interesting. What is more gratifying is that 69% of small business owners said if secure choice or something like that were available right now, they would take a serious look at implementing it for their own business. To find out more about secure choice, this is our website, retirementsecurityforall.org, and thank you very much.
I'm Roland Davis. I have a connection with the Center for American Progress, a think tank here in DC. It's not a job, it's just a connection. So a lot of the stuff that I do is really, it's sad to say, a hobby, a retirement hobby, doing this kind of research, but the Center for American Progress encourages me in that and provides a platform for some publishing as well. So what I will talk about today is something that we've described as the SAFE retirement plan. We're all about acronyms today. Turns out acronyms can lead to trouble because we found out after the fact that there is in fact another plan proposal with the same acronym, SAFE. And I saw Preston Rutledge on the registration list, but I don't see him in this room. He's on the staff with Senator Hatch. And this is Senator Hatch put out a proposal that I think is basically a sort of a gradual buy-up of deferred annuities to sort of smooth out, something like that. So, and they beat us by about 4 days. So they put their thing out before we published our paper. We shared a panel earlier this year, and I said if he wants to keep SAFE, then we will move to SAFER, the SAFER plan. I think case closed on that. And he laughed when I said that. I want to spend as much time as I can on the stuff I love, which is the financial analysis. So a lot of this upfront stuff is pretty general. The one thing I can say is in our work on the general stuff, we were in contact with Senator Harkin's staff, and the Harkin proposal, the USA plan, is written in pretty broad terms, as laws tend to be. And that umbrella covers this plan. So, I mean, we would view this as something that could be adopted under the Harkin proposal, but with more specific kinds of design features built into this. So the key thing is it's a collective defined contribution arrangement. So let's start with defined contribution. Defined contribution means the only employer and employee obligation is to put money in a fixed amount and no variability. So this is where I've chosen to do my research because, in my view, the private sector employers have spoken loudly with their feet. And if we can't do something more efficient in the defined contribution framework, that it's probably not worth the effort to bang our head on some of these areas. So, as an actuary, it was a tough bridge for me to cross, but that's where I'm at. So I really am trying to stay in the defined contribution arena because I think it would be acceptable if you can manage the risk. And so that's the key, and that's the collective part of it. So the collective defined contribution basically says there is no individual account that has an endpoint at retirement for each individual, because that endpoint presents risk and opportunity. I mean, there's going to be huge differences from one endpoint to another. So the idea is you push the same money into the system, but you use smoothing to the extent you can to mitigate that endpoint risk. And so that's what we're trying to experiment with and model and so forth. So it's a true defined contribution plan. Similar to Hank, we would view it as state or regional structures, nonprofits, run by an independent board. The universal access with auto enrollment would be a key feature for us. Full portability, because once you're in a plan, you can stay there. Even if you change employers, you just tell your employer what plan you're in. That's also part of the Harkin proposal. Collective defined contribution, we've talked about that. The key consequences: employer rates are fixed. There's no unfunded liability exposure. We kind of insist on staying within that kind of a defined framework. No investment choice. You'll see a bit later that everybody's in this collective fund, and to make collective funds work, you really can't do that with individual choice. So everybody's in the same boat from an investment, and we do have a lifetime payout form of a variable annuity. On this slide, the important thing is that we have separated the accumulation fund and the payout fund, again, similar to what Hank's proposal is. And this is another bridge that I cross as an actuary who spent a lot of time on investment issues with pension plans, is the need to focus separately on the different risk dimensions of the accumulation process and the payout process, whether it's a defined benefit plan or anything. That the ability to sort of squish that together and deal with it in an aggregate basis can create problems, and so we separate the two. The accumulation fund will look like a cash balance plan. So there's a notional account, regular investment credits, but with what's called a collar. So there's a minimum and a maximum, and then bonus credits. So to the extent the plan is funded at sufficient levels, there will be additional bonus investment credits that will be provided. The payout fund would provide an annuity with fixed pricing, fixed COLA. To keep things in balance, there's the possibility of temporary COLA suspensions if you hit a bad patch, but there's also the ability to have bonus payments. So unlike a typical variable annuity, and we'll get more into this, where if you have good experience, it sort of builds itself into the annuity payment itself, which then becomes hard to back away from. The idea here is if you have good experience, you pay out money, but it's not built into the ongoing annuity payment. So it's not like, here it is, and now I'm going to take it back. It's, here it is, we had a good year. Here's a little less next year because we didn't do quite so well, but your base payment moves forward. This is just a chart to illustrate the concept of risk sharing and the use of a collar, investment collar, to basically trade off some of your upside opportunity to provide a floor of protection in some way, shape, or form. From a generational standpoint, every cohort will know in advance that they're being treated fairly as long as everybody is following the same path. So it does require some solidarity from one age cohort to the next, and that's an initial sort of educational challenge to have people understand that looking forward, they don't know what their outcomes will be, and if they're willing, in a general sense, to trade off what would be sort of surplus assets to provide some forward-looking security, then, and we think they are, that would be an acceptable process. This is a specific layout of the accumulation parameters. And I should say that this is a work in progress. So if you go back to the original paper from 2013, it'll be a little different than this. So we've tweaked some of this already, and we are continuing to tweak as we model and test different things. But in the accumulation fund, pretty high equity content, 75%. I even think you could go to 80% and make the thing work. Beyond that, it probably gets a little tough. The investment credit each year, we use a trailing 3-year average return for the fund with a floor of 0 and a cap of 9. So that's the collar. And then the bonus credits kick in if the plan is, it's not an actuarial present value kind of funded ratio, but it's just a current value. So don't call it a funded ratio, but the current value ratio. Basically, the sum of the assets divided by the sum of the actual accounts, notional accounts. And so if you're over 130%, you start to generate bonus credits, which become very, very generous as you approach and surpass 200% funded. So you're basically, if the investments are really good, you're pushing the money back into the accounts very quickly. Key outcomes for a mature plan that we've modeled. So this is the stochastic modeling part. Average investment credit came out to 6.8%, which breaks down into the regular credit, 4.7, and a bonus of 2.1 on average. Bonuses kick in about 60% of the time. And the regular credit, you can see how it breaks down within the collar, about half the time inside the collar, 15% at the floor, and 35% at the max. The funded status at the median in our modeling hangs in at about 136%. At the 5th percentile, we get to 94%. So it can, obviously this kind of a plan can have a current value ratio below 100%. The key is to test that it won't get stuck there, or it won't spiral down too. So it won't get stuck and won't spiral down. That's the sustainability issue. Probability of 10 consecutive years with a ratio below 100% is 6%. So, we'd like that to be 0, but then we don't have a defined contribution plan anymore. We have a defined benefit plan. So without opening that door to some degree, and you can, theoretically you can open it a little bit. There are around the world systems that have programs with what they would call solvency contributions that might kick in. So it's not like a typical DB where you're amortizing gains and losses all the time. It's just that there's a provision that in extreme cases, someone, the government or the employer typically, would provide some additional money to get you through that. We have not tried to build that in, but it's always a possibility. Okay, this is the stuff that I'm kind of into right now. That is evaluating and comparing different kinds of risk-sharing programs. And to my way of thinking, you need to do that with stochastic modeling. So I'm incredibly in favor of the efforts of the profession to look at plans and evaluate them and give grades, but I also urge to really drill down and do the math, because that's what our profession can uniquely provide. Now, it's not always easy to do that, but when you're talking particularly about collective plans and looking at sustainability, it's critical, to do that forward-looking modeling. I also have come to the conclusion that you really need to separate the accumulation phase and the payout phase. They have different risk tolerances. At the end of the day, you may be able to bring them together into something that looks like a cohesive whole, but at least do the analysis separately before you decide that they need to be joined. One thing that you'll see when we get to the payout part of this is that we believe that our two phases are separable. In other words, our payout proposal could be tacked on to a cash balance plan, a defined contribution plan. So it's not something that is necessarily part and parcel of the accumulation phase of it. So if you're going to do the comparison, level playing field. In the work that I've done, I said, let's just pump 10% of pay into a system, whatever it may be. So everybody's getting the same input, expected input. And we're going to have a comparable investment risk. So 10%, where does that come from? That's about the median level of contributions going into 401k plans these days. So, it's, again, if employers and employees have an implied preference for what their cost would be, 10% is the median. Investment risk, I've looked at a target date fund, typical target date fund, and roughly that can be linked to a 75 to 80% constant equity allocation in terms of the overall riskiness of it. So I either use a target date fund or I use here a 75% equity allocation, low expenses, so I'm assuming everybody's investing efficiently. I use the same stochastic model and I look at the results over a 37-year accumulation period converted to an annuity. So there's a number of metrics here, but I'm going to jump to this first. Standard defined contribution plan. So on the left, I'm assuming that the 10% inputs are split between 5% from the employee and 5% from the employer here. So the employer cost on the left-hand side, you can see is a constant 5% for the defined contribution plan. The replacement ratio out of the plan is where the risk is felt by the employees. So it's a big spread. The median is 39.2. The downside risk, 25.6. That is the average of the worst quintile of results. The upside is 65.1. That's the average of the top quintile. And then I have a shortfall probability below 34%. 34% replacement combined with 36% from Social Security gets you to sort of a minimum threshold of 70% income replacement. So looking at the shortfall probability is something else that I look at there. Almost a third have a shortfall relative to that benchmark. Here's the DB plan. Now this is just the accumulation phase. So this is a lump sum DB plan. And now we see a big spread on the employer cost from almost 0 up to 11%. This is the underlying economic cost of providing this. I'm not doing actuarial smoothing or anything like that. It's just the underlying economics of getting whatever the investment performance would be over a 37-year period, how much do you have to pay to get to the desired lump sum amount. There's also a spread for the replacement ratios. That's in interest rate risk. So you have a lump sum at retirement, you still have to convert it to an annuity.
How did the numbers low as a half over the whole period?
This is an employer, so there's always 5% employee money flowing in. So basically, you could say the total cost is from basically 5 to 16%. So these are the two benchmarks. And this benchmark, by the way, I would say is a perfected 401k arrangement. In other words, low cost, target date fund, no leakage. So, this becomes very important. I definitely need to do better than this, or I'd say I'm wasting my time. The best thing we can do is perfect the 401k system if we can't do better than this, or try and find DB type arrangements. So here is a mature collective DC plan, and you see again a big spread, but the downside risk is now pretty comparable to the lump sum DB plan, actually a little better, and the median benefit is better than on the DC plan back here, and we have significant upside. Now there's a key word in this. Oh, tracker plan, that's wrong. That was an incorrect label. Tracker plan is another idea from a few years ago. So the label is incorrect there. This is just a collective DC plan. Mature collective CD. Mature is an important word because to make these plans run, you have to assume that there's a reserve that allows you to smooth. And if you start from scratch, you need to build a reserve. And so either build it or get it from somewhere else. Get it from another plan, get it from the government, get it from an employer. So the existence of that reserve that allows the plan to operate in a mature state is kind of critical. and is an issue. It's a major issue because if you grow it from scratch, the money that flows into the reserves is money that's not going to the early age cohorts. And so that there's generational equity issues. That's the current issue I'm exploring right now, is some techniques that I think will mitigate that and perhaps even provide a tighter range of outcomes. So stay tuned for further developments on that. Let me talk about the payout plan. As I said, it's kind of a variable annuity with collective risk sharing again. So it's not an insured annuity, but there's a modest equity allocation. So we're taking some risk to enhance the long-term return, but we're providing more stable pricing for the annuity, and I think the structure provides sort of an automatic way to manage longevity risk. Here's the specifics. 35% equity. At retirement, an annuity is determined lifetime with a fixed 2% COLA. The interest rate for conversion is either 5% or the average of the 10-year Treasury plus 50 basis points from the prior year, if that's higher. So if you're in a high interest rate cycle, you would give the participants some benefit from that. Bonus payments, again, made when there's sufficient surplus based on a fixed schedule. So the schedule that we're working with starts at a 5% bonus if you're at 120%, and then there's different levels that go up. These are all rules that can be written on a piece of paper and put in front of the trustees. So I think, Don, you raised that issue one, that if there's a lot of discretion in these things, that can be a problem. But we're trying to design rules that we've tested beforehand. We have to allow some escape clause, at the end of the day, but we've tried to put this down in a formulaic fashion that can go forward. So the bonus payments can grow, again, to be pretty large. There is some survey work that was done in the UK that actually showed participants like this idea of bonus payments. The Christmas bonus. I mean, many of us have lived with bonuses as part of our compensation stream, and it works fine. There's no reason retirees can't, as long as there's a floor that is there to provide stability. COLA suspension is possible, with the end of the day requirement that the board might have to even reduce the base benefit if the most extreme situations unfold. Here's some statistics on the payout plan. Bonus payments, we're kicking in about 70% of the time. The average works out to about 13%. COLA suspension kicks in about 5% of the time, but they do cluster. So if you suspend a COLA, it's quite possible and even likely that it might be for a period of years. Funded ratio generally in the range of 125 to 135%, and pretty rare to go below 100%. Some graphs, some more on inflation protection. I'm going to wrap up here. The ages precept. Alignment, we've taken the employer out of the role of an insurer or risk taker. We have large-scale operations with professional administration, investment functions. We've eliminated any complex investment decisions for employees. Everybody's in the same fund. Governance, nonprofit run by an independent board with professional staff. Again, the idea is that the mechanics of what would happen are very transparent, written into a document without saying these are guarantees, but with saying this is the way we will intend to distribute profits and bonuses based on that. Efficiency, universal coverage with auto-enrollment, low fees. Sharing of investment risk across age cohorts is a key issue for efficiency of controlling risk. Lifetime income with this payout program that we described, and portability. Sustainability, this is where I think that the stochastic modeling is critical. And even then, it should be done not just by one actuary, it should be done by a few actuaries to verify that it's independent of a particular model and so forth. But the ability to remove cost shocks from the employer is critical to long-term sustainability, I think. Employees can learn to handle risk if it's within some kind of a controlled range. Employers, if they're provided the opportunity to run away from it, they run away from it. So that's my story for today.
Great. We've got a few minutes if anybody has any questions about the assessments or either the two new proposals that have been presented. Yeah. Jerry?
The definition of efficiency that's being used, I'm just going to throw out a thought, and just you can comment on whether it's part of the assessment. And that is, whenever I see a plan or I see a projection that says the expected funding ratio is going to be 135% or numbers like that, I worry about bang for buck. So you're paying an awful lot for the concept of security. Is it really too much based on what you get back? You know, holding 35% expected value that's never going to get spent is maybe a troubling concept if you define cost effectiveness in a certain way. And I'm just curious whether that's part of the assessment.
So I'll say we don't really consider that specific issue as we go through the assessment. Again, a lot of these concepts that we're dealing with are sort of qualitative, and I think a lot of our focus with regard to efficiency tends to be around things like are annuity options available at, say, a reasonable cost, institutional pricing around investment options, the ability of smaller plans to pull together. I think that's a lot of what our focus tends to be on efficiency. I think you do raise a great point in terms of the risk-return trade-off there and building up a significant cushion. Is that potentially inefficient? I think it depends. Maybe to Roland's point about if everybody agrees on the deal going in and is comfortable with it, then maybe sort of collectively everybody sort of agrees that trade-off is appropriate. But obviously, different people can have a different perspective on that. Roland, I don't know if you want to comment.
I think it's a great question. And it's good to see you after 100 years. In a collective system, my view is that the surplus belongs to the collective group of participants across generations. So it's really, to me, it's more of a generational equity issue than a bang for buck issue. And if you look at the way the collective distribution of collective defined contribution benefits has shifted to a large part of that is because you've got more assets kicking off investment income to be distributed. So it's everybody benefits from that improved asset base. And eventually, the collective plan in theory is designed to run forever. So they're all benefiting from whatever asset base you have, and if it's a large asset base. But if
Roland, in a security sense or because of the bonuses? In what sense do you say they're all benefiting?
Yeah, you look at the money that's being held and invested relative to the accounts. And if it's 135%, and you're earning money on 135% of what people are seeing in their accounts, you have bigger amounts that you can plow back in the form of bonuses.
I'd say there's a slightly different perspective we can look at that too. I know as we wrote the efficiency brief part of the monograph, we were very concerned about making sure that as much of the money that goes into the system is actually used to deliver benefits to people. And I think in that context, if we looked at large surpluses developing, 150% ratios or something like that, we might score that with some negative aspects because there's a lot of money there that's not delivering benefits to people that have contributed those assets. Now, if they can pay dividends out over future years, perhaps that counterbalances that. But the real effort in efficiency was making sure that as much of the money is used to deliver benefits as possible. Good time for one more question?
First of all, excellent presentations, and I am a believer that we need to come in somewhere in the middle between 401k style plans and traditional defined benefits. But looking at these, I couldn't help but thinking that they seem reminiscent of the mutual benefit societies of centuries past, and that evolved across into mutual insurance companies. And then in recent decades, most mutual insurance companies disappeared. So what are the lessons of history that we could apply as we start examining these designs? And have you considered that?
Very almost philosophical question. One line of thinking about how institutions morph and change in interaction with the government is that the government sets up regulations, which that whole process gets influenced by the organizations that are being regulated, and eventually you create a box that you can't break out of. Doesn't mean the old organizations poorly formed, it just means they weren't speaking loud enough or something like that. And so my view is we're in a box, and it's not going to be easy to make. You think of the money that would be spent against a passive investment fund operation. There are people making a lot of money right now with the current system, and so I have no illusions that this would be an easy task. But I think I don't think there's a flaw in the design. I think we just find ourselves in the current situation, kind of boxed in.
Okay, we're interfering with your lunch hour now, so I want to thank everybody for coming to the session again, and hope you enjoy the lunch. As I mentioned earlier, these gentlemen have agreed to stay around. If anybody has some burning questions that you want to get to us, we'll wait up here for that. Thank you.